Hello, Beverly Hills lawyers. Good afternoon, and welcome to Work-Life Balance webinars. My name is Andrea Sherban. I'm the chair of Work-Life Balance Committee, and I'm very happy to have a special guest today that is gonna give us some wisdom when it comes to nutrition. And I know lawyers, we are good in negotiation for us or for our clients, but now today it's time when we will learn some tips how to negotiate with our mindset, with our behaviors, and with our patterns in life when it comes to nutrition. And I have a privilege to have a special guest, and I'm gonna make a short introduction about Bridget Lewis, and she's here to give us some tools, some value for our lifestyle, for our peace of mind, for our health in general. And I don't want to say more because I'm gonna let Bridget to take over and to make her own introduction and to tell us how we can improve our work-life balance starting from our nutrition. So thank you so much, Bridget, for being here with us and to be able to bring some value in lawyers' life.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you for that introduction. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I hope that I can give you some really good tips that will help you just improve your life and your quality of life and perhaps avoid disease. So the name of this webinar is Live Like a Lobster. So I've got a presentation for you, which we'll go into, and we'll get started straight away so you can get some information on what it is that's going to help you moving forward. So I'm just going to share the screen. So here we are, Live Like a Lobster, how you can negotiate the aging process with nutrition. We won't be just talking about nutrition. There are a couple of other things because it is about your ability to look after your mental health and stress. So why it's called Live Like a Lobster. We, as you know, all have DNA strands, and at the end of our DNA strands, we have this, you may not know, a little sort of socks on the end, and these are called telomeres. Now, telomeres sit on the end of the DNA strands, and they gradually get shorter as the cells die in our body until eventually they run out. But when the telomeres run out, that's when we die. So lobsters are very fortunate to be able to produce an enzyme called telomerase. Now we produce that up until where our growth period is over, but they can produce it forever. So there's no reason for them to die. But what we've understood is that we can actually take control of this telomere, the health of a telomere effectively, that can slow up the aging process. And this is what we can do. And also we know that we can turn the human cells on and off by our lifestyle and what we eat. So we've got three factors that decide our wellness. And these are basically, I think most doctors would have put this, and integrative functional medicine doctors would agree that we have three things that we have to deal with. One, we have imbalances in the body, which is either too much food or not enough nutritional value. We have toxicity. So we have the liver that's recirculating hormones around the body into a more toxic form, and stress. And I'm sure all of you have stress that you have to deal with, fast life, fast pace. What we also know with stress is it doesn't automatically turn off. So what we need to do is take some actions on this. So I just want to show you really quickly, there's not going to be a lot of science, and you won't certainly see many of these images, but this is about the detoxification pathway. This is actually a picture of your liver. And if you notice here, there are different phases, 1, 2, and then there's actually another phase that's in here that's not mentioned. But there are lots of things that we need here, vitamins and folic acid, glutathione, antioxidants, etc. And then we've got lots of amino acids down here, which we get from protein, and all these things we need in order to get the liver to be able to detoxify toxins that come into our body. You can see down the bottom, there's a little mention here of all the different toxins that we have, which again, I'm sure you're aware of, in our air, in our water, in everything that we do effectively. So that's the liver for you. There's a little point down here that's interesting, which is cruciferous vegetables, and garlic. So these things are really important. We'll touch on those a little bit later. And then from there, we do a bit more of the excretion of waste. So the main things here, there's all the different ways we detoxify, but there are two things I wanted to focus on here. One is skin, and it's estimated that the average American woman is using at least 9 beauty products a day that contain up to 168 toxins. Now, not all of these are really harmful, but nevertheless, we want to minimize them. So there's an online organization, ewg.org. You probably all know of that. We don't have one here. We have to rely on the American website. And you can put in your beauty products or any chemicals you're using, men as well, you know, shaving foam, anything for the hair, all those things. And they'll tell you how clean they are. So that's something that's really interesting to look at, because some of the marketed products now that are meant to be clean, when you put them in there, it's surprising that they've still got quite a lot of toxic exposure. Well, you have a lot of toxic exposure from them. The other thing that's interesting is that the lungs excrete up to 70% of our waste as carbon dioxide. So, you know, how clean is the air that you're breathing? And I know that, you know, we're in cities and it's not necessarily as clean as it should be. Right, so we have something called epigenetics, which some of you may know of, and that's the ability to turn our genes on and off with our behavior and our environment. So just because you have a gene for something, so I know that, you know, the cancer gene for breast cancer was a big thing, and Angelina Jolie had made a massive decision to have a double mastectomy to sort of lessen the risk of breast cancer. But what we know is that you can carry that gene, but it doesn't actually mean that you're going to get the disease. In fact, about 7% and under of cancers are from genes. So it's not about that, but also we don't want to turn the genes on. So we can control them as well. So we've got things like exposure to metals like mercury in our teeth, or air pollution, benzene, which is 90% of the exposure from benzene is from smoking, and then dyes, petroleum, pesticides, pharmaceuticals. Pesticides, obviously, is where we want to be looking at organic foods. And I know it's a lot more expensive than regular vegetables and fruit. But what we have found is that the chemical, it's actually worse for you to have vegetables that are not organic than it is to not have them at all. So that's a paper that came out late last year. So that actually the damage is far greater to have them. So you're better off not. But that's not what we want to do either. And then, of course, the last thing, EMFs, turning off the router at night for the Wi-Fi, the phone onto airplane mode. I know that's really difficult. We're all in a fast pace, but it's actually getting it out of the space. We call it sleep hygiene. We want to keep that away an hour before we go to bed, having screens off, but turning the router off is to minimize the EMFs. So I'm going to race through these because there's a lot of information. So going on from there is another very important point of the toxicity in the body is what we call the estrogen cycle. So estrogen, obviously we all have that, male and female, and that has to be eliminated every day when we go to the bathroom and in our poop effectively. And if we're not pooping daily, that gets recycled back around through the body and it turns into a different form. It becomes a more toxic form of estrogen, and that is responsible and well, not entirely, but it is definitely linked to hormone-driven cancers. So we need to really make sure that that estrogen is not being recycled, and that's something that we want to also include a lot of fiber in the body, because our fiber intake may not be enough, but also the importance of cruciferous vegetables. So the cruciferous vegetables are a family that consist of, you know, kale, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, rocket, I think you call arugula there, radish, watercress. So those things are something you want to get into the diet regularly, every second day, ideally, if you can, just to keep helping, supporting the liver to just clear the toxins that you're exposed to every day. Using a water filter or air filters if you're in the city, checking the cleaning products, as I said, and your ingredients, and then using organic foods as much as you can. Another thing to look at is your food choices and the stress that you put on the body. So this is a chart about the acid alkaline pH of the body is just alkaline, and we want to keep it there. But what happens is the acidity in the food that we have, it doesn't change the blood. The blood will always do everything it can to remain alkaline. But in order to do that, it draws from the bones and the muscles. So it'll take magnesium and phosphorus. And that's why we've got a big problem with, osteoporosis is a perfect example of that. It takes from, as I said, the muscles as well. So really being conscious about what we're eating and making sure that we can eat as much alkaline food as possible. Now, something like Coca-Cola, for example, or Pepsi, and Diet Coke, and any version of that drink, by the way, is highly acidic. So the pH is generally less than 4. And because the pH scale, as you may know, is logarithmic, every notch it drops down from 7 to 6, and going down is times 10. So then it goes times 100, etc. So you can imagine how acidic it is on the body to have just one can of Coke. And how much work the body has to go through to actually pull everything that it needs get into the blood to keep that all settled where it is. So that's just something to notice. And also there's a study at the bottom here on menopausal women. They noticed that high animal products in the diet, because animal products are acidic, and I'm not advocating that you are vegetarian at all. It's not what I'm saying, but they had a lower bone density. So by taking the minerals out of the bone, of course, it makes them weaker. So that's just something to consider about your, acid alkaline. And you can correct that, the pH of the body, funnily enough, by having things like warm water and lemon in the morning, which is great. Even though lemon is acidic, it has an alkaline effect on the body. Green smoothies, chlorophyll, green powders, cucumber, to eat and drink vegetables and fruit, lowering stress, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and then reduce the acid forming foods. So like I said, things like dairy, but anything, fast foods, obviously, and processed foods are obviously a problem, and soda drinks. The other thing that's really good for you for detoxification is using a mini trampoline or a rebounder. That's one of the only things that actually gets all the cells moving, so the lymph is working and clearing, because the lymph itself doesn't have a pump, so it needs that support. Okay. As you know, and it's always discussed there as it is here, the obesity issue that we have, mainly linked, it appears, to the introduction of corn syrup into the diet, where obesity rose at the same time, incredibly. It's meant to be more addictive than cocaine, so very difficult for people who are addicted to corn syrup food items to get off it. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff there, but what was really interesting is the microbiome is also important. So that's our gut bacteria. The gut bacteria decides what we're eating and what we're not. And we have, most of us will have a very large population of sugar-loving gut bacteria, and we feed that regularly. And so the bacteria that deal with other foods, say like fibers, like beans and lentils, can sort of get a little bit overwhelmed and die out. Unless we feed them, they don't continue to multiply. But they have noticed that with the microbiome and the weight, that if they do such a thing as a fecal transplant, and when they have obese mice and they do a fecal transplant into a skinny mouse, the skinny mouse gets fat without changing the diet at all. And the same is in reverse. So skinny mice, a fat mouse will get skinny if it's had the transplant from a skinny mouse. So it is really, and they're eating the same food and they haven't changed the calorific intake. So it's really about, it shows the strong link with the microbiome as well. So that's really important. And that's about prebiotics and probiotics. So prebiotic foods such as Jerusalem artichoke. It's not something that we use every day. It's a really uncommon vegetable, but it's just, you can cut it up and have it as sort of a roast vegetable. Asparagus is great as well. So they're two things to just consider to add into the diet for boosting the microbiome. Of course, beans are incredible, and lentils. And it's a matter of doing it slowly, and not just having a whole lot of beans and then finally you feel incredibly bloated and unwell, but actually just doing it slowly to build. So you're feeding the bacteria so they multiply and then they're ready to take it on. Otherwise, they get hit with a lot of these foods and they're not ready for it. So that's when we get bloating and we get wind and discomfort. And people say, I can't eat lentils. So yeah, just just building that gradually. So that's all about having a healthy gut, and we need that because at least 80% of the serotonin, our feel-good hormone, is made in the gut. And the gut is also where we want to absorb the nutrients. And this can be compromised by leaky gut, which you may have heard of. Now, leaky gut is when the cells of the gut, the lining, which is only one cell thick, so it's really, really fine, is opened up. These cells that are tightly packed are opened up, and food and toxins and bacteria can get, even parasites can then leak into the blood alongside the gut. And that's where we get things like autoimmune diseases and rheumatoid arthritis and all sorts of things that have become modern day illnesses. Now, and we can get rid of this leaky gut. And we do that in a process which is called the 5 R's. So this is just a very quick, look at it. But some of the main things, or the main things that are responsible for leaky gut are non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So we call them ibuprofen here and paracetamol, antibiotics, gluten and dairy. So especially gluten. And I know that there's a lot of conversation about that. And, there are a lot of people that say gluten's fine, but at the end of the day, gluten is identified by the body as something that is a toxin because it's now into the bloodstream when it shouldn't be there. If it just stayed in the gut and it didn't open the cells, it would probably be fine. But the fact is it opens these cells and leaks into the blood, and the blood signals all these things coming in as toxins, and it sets up an immune reaction. And if it does it so often or it can't cope with it, then this immune reaction just keeps going and it gets worse, and people get very ill with that. And then they become celiac, for example. So really, none of us are tolerant to gluten. That's the sad news, and the antibiotics. But, if you're doing other things, you might be able to minimize your exposure. So you can take things to seal this gut back up again, and you can do that. And that's where you've got, your kimchi and sauerkraut and fermented foods that comes in there, and bone broth. So those things will help reseal the cells. And put them back together. So, it could be a balance, and that's something that you can consider. So we remove those things, and then we restore with enzymes if we need it, and acid in the stomach. As we get older, that gets less. Both of those get less. We repair the gut with collagen or glutamate, marshmallow root, and then we put in the probiotics to refeed and get the right bacteria. And then the last part of the 5 R's is a relaxed work-life balance, which is why we're all here today. So that's our 5 R's for the healthy gut. And obviously you work with a nutritionist to do all that. Fasting comes up a lot, and fasting is a great way of healing. It's got to be done. There are lots of discussions about fasting and intermittent fasting or whatever, but the most important thing is that you want to give the body a rest. And we have become like the Western world, we're just grazers, and we're always sort of snacking on something. And we really need to rest the body. So it's not focusing on digestion, but in fact, it's focusing on healing or repairing or what it needs to do. So ideally, having a 5-hour break between each meal would be the perfect solution. And that would allow the body time to rest and deal with the food, assimilate the nutrients, and do the work with the nutrients that it has to do, why we're actually having them, so that they can provide us with energy and do the work in the body. So that would allow, a 14-hour fast overnight, which is great. We burn fat after the 13th hour. 14 hours is a maximum that we recommend for women, because over 14 hours of regular fasting can disrupt hormones. So that's not recommended at all. And that 14-hour gap, the idea is not to eat late at night and then eat, at 1 o'clock in the daytime. The idea is also to eat early and eat again within an hour of waking if you can, or as close to as possible. And the reason we recommend that is because when you wake, your stress hormone cortisol is high, and you don't want to increase that by not eating. The body is stressed. It's not getting any food. Then perhaps you have a cup of coffee, which also raises the cortisol levels. And so this is just also aging and causing the body a lot of harm. So realistically, we want to eat within an hour of rising, have, you know, hot water and with lemon, and then look at having something to eat, even if it's a smoothie, but just with something with fiber as well. A balance of fat, fiber, protein is great. And occasionally, or once a week, or whenever, you can do a 24-hour fast, a liquid only fast with herbal teas, and just really rest the body. And that's hugely beneficial. The science has shown that we've had huge decreases in blood pressure, and all sorts of health things that will support fasting. But fasting, not fasting for sort of long, messing around with your fasting, for women especially, is absolutely, as I said, not ideal. And just be consistent with what you're doing. There has to be a stage where the body feels safe. It has to know when it's going to get fed. When it's erratic eating, that's when the body gets really unsafe, and it stores fat to make sure that it has reserves. So you need to be consistent. That 5-hour eating gap is great, and doing something regularly, and not sort of just messing around every day, changing things dramatically. But you can do the regular 14-hour fast each day. Okay. And now the impact of stress. So we know that we have, I'm sure most of you know, we have the nervous system with two arms of the nervous system. We have one that is designed for us to escape a tiger if it was chasing us. And obviously we don't have any tigers in our Western world, but modern day stress is usually traffic jams, work pressure, financial difficulty, and relationships. One of the biggest stresses inducing factors we have in this century is caffeine as well. So as I mentioned before, it does raise stress. So we need to keep an eye on that. Getting up in the morning and going to work and grabbing a coffee on the way is really not what we need to be doing. We need to be having something decent to eat, and then looking at having the caffeine and treating it sort of slightly with respect. It's a drug. It's not good for us. Sadly, it is an anti-nutrient, we call it. It stops you absorbing all the good nutrients out of your food or supplements if you're taking them. So it's something that you need to keep away from that. It should be kept away by at least an hour either side of taking any supplements. And clearly, obviously, only having caffeine up until midday is preferable because of the half-life of caffeine, which is 9 hours, I think. So it stays in the body for a long time. And that's why we can have a problem with sleep. So anyone who's got a sleep issue, really, caffeine definitely only before midday, and really it should be, we always recommend only 1 or 2 cups maximum, and organic as well if you can, because we've seen that caffeine contains mold toxins, and that's really not good for our system. It's another toxic exposure. So yeah, keep it organic where possible. Okay, and then obviously there are some relaxing things that you can do there. Right, and then there's just some research on, if we wanted, on where this information is coming from, so that's great. So then back to our telomeres that we've got on the end of our DNA strands. So we've got more control over the aging than we think, and we can lengthen them, we can reduce the stress, and that is inversely related to our telomere functioning. And taking at least 7 hours sleep, 7 hours is a minimum. We really should be aiming for that. And if that's difficult to do, then it's more about, even when you can, I'm sure you've got massive workloads and deadlines and things, is to try and take that hour away from the screen before you go to bed, and away from the phone, so that you can actually really wind down, try and just downtime with a bath or something like that. So I think we all know that, but its practice is difficult. Maintaining the weight, exercising regularly. And also the thing with the exercising too, I have a lot of clients that are really like, they're runners and they're cyclists and they're super fit and healthy, and they're sick. And the one thing that I've noticed is that they were all regularly exercising, but every day, but they're really pushing hard. And actually, you need to rest. There are days you need to walk, and we'll talk a bit about that as well. So Mediterranean diet, healthy microbiome, which we talked about, and doing some yoga and meditation and breath work. The importance of yoga and meditation, I know everybody's talked about that a lot, and there are a lot of people that think, oh my goodness, it's such a spiritual hippie thing and a waste of time. But what we know with stress is stress doesn't turn itself off by itself. And in order to turn the stress hormones off, we need to actively do that. And we need to do that by breath. And yoga, obviously the whole idea of yoga is that you're moving with breath. So that's all about the breath. Meditation is really, as you know, shutting down the mind. So that gives you a time for the stress hormones to drop down. And breath work is an active way as well of getting it down. And that is because there was a fantastic experiment done. I love this. They had 5 rodents in a box with enough food, water, and space. And then they introduced another 5. And of course, they tested the stress hormones and they went up. You know, of course, everyone was stressed. They weren't getting what they needed. So then they took the 5 out again and left them back where they were. These ones, they had everything they needed. And they retested the stress hormones to find that they were still high. So the point is that just because you leave your desk, you get home, you go to the pub, we go to pubs here, you probably go somewhere else, to a bar or whatever, a restaurant, have something to eat. The stress hormones are still active and you need to reduce those in order to help with your longevity. So you can do this quite easily. In fact, you can do it within a minute. It's a matter of breathing. And all you have to do is breathe in really slowly for a count of 5 through your nose, always through your nose. Breathe out slowly for a count of 5 or longer. And if you do that 6 times, really slowly, that will take you out of fight and flight back into rest and digest. So that will shift your nervous system and it'll shut down those hormones. So that's something before you've got a meeting, before you've got a call, after the meeting, after a call, at the end of the day, whenever you're feeling, you know, you're being challenged. That little thing is so important to help reduce the stress hormones in the body. And that's why these things like yoga and meditation, breath work have become so popular. Right, so earth to mouth, removing toxins, we talked about trying to go organic, reading ingredients. Many people, when I ask them what ingredients are in there, they'll read out the protein, carbohydrate, fat content, and that's not what we're looking for. Obviously, we're looking for the actual ingredients. Can you make it in your kitchen? Do you recognize the ingredients, or are they chemicals? If they're chemicals, you really don't want them. And I know that for a while, Kraft had made some chocolate biscuits or cookies, I think you call them, that didn't have cacao in them at all. They were actually, it was a chemical, and they were really proud of themselves. They'd made this cheaper alternative for chemical chocolate. So it's that sort of thing we're looking for. You'll be surprised how many of the cheaper chocolate biscuits are not chocolate. And then just organizing the kitchen for healthy fast food. So a healthy meal that you can produce on the table in 10 minutes, like salads, smoothies, steamed vegetables, soup, beans, rice, lentils. You're just being ready for that. And then just cook ahead of time. You can always batch freeze food, and that helps so that you can just warm up and something instant. So it's a little bit of preparation. I know it's more difficult to use a lot of vegetables and have to do a lot of preparation, but actually we find that people do it once a week and they're ready. Right, so this is something I wanted to talk to you about, which is the blue zones. I know I'm racing through, but there are a lot of slides. So there are 5 blue zones in the world, and they are characterized by the fact that instead of 2 or 3 people living as centenarians over 100, there are about 20 to 30. And there are several things they have in common, but there are the 5 here, which is Okinawa, Ikaria, Loma Linda, Nicoya, and Sardinia. So they have a sense of community, a sense of purpose. They do regular things like walk and do farming, and they're carrying things, so they're active, and they also eat a lot of homemade food. But what's interesting is we've had a lot of talk, you know, I know that everyone talks about keto diets, and then there's the vegan movement, and, you know, there's always something new. But what is interesting is I'll just show you the slides of what these people eat, because there's a bit of a pattern, and you'll see why these diets that keep coming up in books and the press and everything else, why you need to just actually be able to take responsibility for your own decisions on what you think you should eat, because this will tell you that maybe some of the things you're talking about aren't necessarily right. So this is Okinawa in Japan, and if you notice down at the bottom, they have 67% of their diet is sweet potato. So that's a carbohydrate, and these people are living a long time. The other thing that's interesting is that they've got 2% fish, meat, and poultry. Okay, so there's probably mainly fish as well there, but there's not a lot of dairy product, but there is a lot of carbohydrate, and they live a long time. Okay, then we've got in Costa Rica, so they've got dairy, but their dairy is mainly from sheep, I think. Yeah. And they also eat some meat, fish, poultry, 5%. So they're eating some in the diet, and they've got some eggs, and so they've got animal products in there, but it's much less. And then Icaria in Greece, again, you've got 6% fish and 5% meat. So, you know, that's in there, and they're living a long time. So do you need to be vegetarian? No, I don't think you necessarily do. This wouldn't show that you would need to be. The same here with Sardinia. Also, they've got 5% meat in there as well. But there's not a little bit of added sugar, but not a lot. And the others don't really have that. Again, here, Sardinia is incredible. Their dairy is mainly from their goats. It's a particular area in Sardinia. And what they found is these goats eat a particular plant called a dwarf plant. And this seems to be very anti-cancer in its properties, have anti-cancer properties, because they have the lowest rate of tumors in domesticated animals. So then the people in Sardinia drink this goat's milk, and they think that that's partly what's going on there. But all that I wanted to show you was that with this, Loma Linda is the same. Now, Loma Linda, again, it's a really low amount of meat and poultry because they are mainly vegetarian there, a little bit of fish, similar sort of thing, fruit and vegetables is very big. So my point is that you don't need to be vegetarian particularly, and eating meat and fish is not necessarily a bad thing. It's about what you choose. And we know that the seas are quite polluted now, and we want to keep our fish to the small fish. So we like the oily fish like anchovies, sardines, mackerel, herring, and wild salmon. They're the main ones that we recommend. And meat, grass-fed meat is really what we want to be looking for. And you know, these sort of ancestors, as they were, and our ancestors even that were eating meat, it was grass-fed meat generally. It's only as we've moved forward that everything's grain-fed, and of course we run the risk of antibiotics in the food chain and things like that. So grass-fed meats and small oily fish are recommended, and they have properties and very important things in them that we don't get from fruit and vegetables. So having them, but again, the percentage is really small. On that, there's another little bit of interesting information about that, which is there was a huge study on people with cancer in the Philippines a long time ago. There'd been an outbreak of peanut poisoning in children, and they found that the children that were really ill and dying were mainly from the more affluent families. And they established that was the difference, was that they were eating they could afford animal products, meat. So they actually did a huge study and discovered that using mice, and they discovered that I think it was mice, it might have been rats, but one or the other, that when they had potential, the mice, they were rats, and they were sort of prone to cancer. So they did a huge study, prone to cancer, and found that when they were given 20% animal products or more, they got cancer. When they reduced it to 5%, the tumors went away. And those with 5% animal products in their diet and less didn't get tumors. So that's something to take into consideration. We should perhaps eat meat and fish and get the benefits of it, but we probably don't need very much. So I just wanted to put that in there. So what we need to be eating, which we all know anyway, is healthy fats, complex carbohydrates, not simple things like white flour, which has got no nutritional value, and pasta and white bread, and cakes and things like that, and cookies. Obviously, plant proteins, which are really good for you, hemp protein, and then you've got things like your vitamins, minerals, and antioxidants, which you get from berries and spinach, asparagus, broccoli. These are all they help sweep up any damaged troublemaking cells in the body. So we want to get rid of those, and that's why we want those. And broccoli sprouts. Broccoli sprouts are amazing. They're very tiny, for those who don't know. They're like alpha sprouts, very fine, and they are responsible for cleaning up that third phase in the liver that I mentioned to you at the first slide. It wasn't on there, but there's a third phase, and broccoli sprouts are literally the only food that helps support that. So anyone who's struggling with liver problems, who has fatty liver, who has cancer, broccoli sprouts are the absolute must to have into their diet to help the liver. And then anti-inflammatory foods like ginger and garlic and turmeric that are amazing as well. Then fiber you need to add. We're talking 30 grams of fiber a day from beans, lentils, broccoli, avocado. And there's something that one of the doctors calls the G bomb. Make sure you have greens, beans, onions, mushrooms, berries, and seeds. And that's really what you should be including in your diet. There's a lot of food there. I mean, obviously, it's about being creative and learning how to cook with these foods. Protein, there's always a big discussion about protein, how much you should have. And we see a lot of bodybuilders trying to gain weight and increase their muscle growth with protein. However, the protein does store as fat when we have too much. So we tend to go for 0.83 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. So if you weigh 60 kilos, you want to have about 45 grams of protein a day spread out in your diet. And we try and look at, as I said, plant-based proteins as well. So beans and hemp powder and, or, you know, legumes. And you can get quite a lot of protein from those. The people who are building up on a lot of protein, the bodybuilders, and they're gaining all this, when they stop actually working out, it just sits there as fat. So it's not ideal for later on in life to have all that fat on the body. Fats don't make you fat, and we need them to make our hormones and keep our cell membranes fluid. So as we get older, our cell membranes get quite dry, and that's when we get wrinkly and we get older in our skin. And so we need to feed really good fats to keep that cell membrane, which is made of fats, nice and lubricated. So everything can be traveling in and out across the cell membrane where it's communicating with other cells and keeping everything functioning. So it has a dual effect of keeping everything working properly and also keeping your skin and your cells nice and lubricated. And that's where we're looking at omega-3s. It's all about the ratio of omega-3 to omega-6. And generally in our Western world, the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio is like 1 to 20, but it should be 1 to 2. So we want to increase the omega-3s and decrease the omega-6. And omega-6 is in everything else. If you imagine all the oils, all the fats, all the meat, everything like that that has any fat in it, that's got omega-6s. So we're looking at things like flaxseed is an amazing source of omega-3. Walnuts is great as well. And then, of course, you can supplement. Krill oil is very good for that. And I mentioned the fish earlier, so you know those. This is just a quick slide to show you why we need nutrients. This is getting the nutrients from the food and turning it into energy. And this is one of the cycles in the body. And you can see all the vitamins that we need here. And this is a really simplified version. I didn't want to do a massive one because each of these sections has circles as well. So there's just more to go around. It's like a network of like cogs and wheels, but they all need vitamins and minerals. And so if we're deficient in that over a period of time, we're going to come unstuck. And that's why we need to really make sure that we're having what we need and we're not getting it from our general standard, what we call our standard Western diet. So the basics of supplementation would be looking at a B complex, which is something that you should always have with food because it will make you feel unwell. Vitamin D, which we know is hugely important for immunity. And the stats have come out from this epidemic, the importance of vitamin D, and vitamin C. So vitamin D you must take with fats. So you can have that with avocado or nuts or any olive oil or any good oils you're having. Vitamin C is something you need to have on an empty stomach. And having those fizzy Barocca things, they don't really work, I'm afraid. So you need to find a better quality vitamin C and have that on an empty stomach. And then omega-3, as I mentioned, just to keep that ratio in order. And then probiotics to help build that bacteria in the gut that we can then feed with the fiber. And we're looking for a minimum of 50 billion. So there are a lot of supplements on the market, especially nowadays. I mean, the wellness industry, it's just expanded exponentially because this is where the money's being made now. And there are a lot of probiotics out there, a lot of products out there that aren't, perhaps they don't have a high enough level to make a difference. And certainly with something like probiotics, if they're low, they'll just be ingested and they just will die because they will be wiped out by your sugar-loving bacteria. So you want to look for something that's got 50 billion if you can. And then your minerals, you're looking at magnesium glycinate, which is great for relaxing if you're struggling with sleep. That's something that is worth taking. It is something you take after the evening meal, and super easy to digest and very absorbable in that form. Zinc picolinate, which is fantastic. Zinc is just such an incredible and underrated sometimes mineral, and we really need that. That's something that you have just before you go to sleep. You can get it from oysters and beef, but otherwise, if you're not eating those regularly, oysters regularly, for example, then you need to be taking a supplement. And with these, both magnesium, magnesium firstly is used for over 300 processes in the body. So you can imagine if you're deficient, your body is not going to be functioning properly. And zinc is used in over 100 processes. So it's also really important. And zinc needs to be had on an empty stomach at night before you go to bed, this one. So you've had your magnesium, say after your evening meal, but just by the bed, you have the zinc. And they're kept away from each other. Don't have them at the same time because the zinc won't take any effect. It'll lose that battle. They're all fighting for receptors and zinc will miss out. Selenium, which is really important also for the liver. Again, it takes vitamin C into glutathione, which is really important for the liver. It's something to keep an eye on. It's always best to be checked and tested to see if you are deficient. Selenium is not something that you take an ongoing amount. You could take it for a month to just boost it, but then you let it go because hopefully you're getting it out of the foods. But you don't want to have too much. You can overdose on selenium. Chromium, this is a fantastic product here, and it's really good for anybody who's, say, has a high intake of sugar, a tendency to, maybe if there's a lot of alcohol in the diet, then, and you're trying to give up, that can be a real battle, and chromium will help get the sugar out of the blood and into the body used for energy. So that's great. And I think that it's not mentioned as much as it should be, but we use it a lot in with anyone who has high blood sugar and a tendency to drink a lot of alcohol. So yeah, that's something that we take into consideration, is adding that into the diet, into the supplements. The other thing that's important was stress, as I mentioned earlier, and this is the mindful eating that comes into play. And a lot of us are eating on the run when we're, like, as I mentioned, getting in the car or getting into public transport, having a coffee, grabbing something on the way that really doesn't have any nutritional value, maybe on the phone while you're eating at lunch or out. I don't know how your lunch works, but and most people I find tend not to sit down quietly and just concentrate on their food. We're not chewing our food enough. We need to really chew the food to break it down. So it arrives in the stomach and the stomach's ready. So when we chew, it notifies the stomach acid and the digestive enzymes and the pancreas and everything to start producing what it needs to produce so that we're ready to take that food. If we just completely eat it, swallow it without chewing, it doesn't have time to prepare for that. And that's when we get distension and discomfort. And it takes a long time to then digest. So that's where we need the time. Also, it would help between the meals to have that time to digest the food. Keeping the water away from food is really important because it just weakens the acid that is in the stomach to break down our food. So we tend to say, drink a glass of water 15 minutes before lunch to ensure that you've had enough water in the diet. So before, hot water and lemon in the morning, maybe you have another glass before you have breakfast. You might have something mid-morning and then something just before you eat. It's quite a good idea to remember to have a glass of water before you're going to have a meal, not with it. And the other thing with water is to not have it constantly. This kind of water bottle era of carrying it around and sipping all day is not good for us either. It's not good for the kidneys. The kidneys are constantly working and filtering. So you want to have a glass of water and then you want to put it down. So 8 ounces and then put it down and leave it for an hour and then just spread it out that way. 1 hour after a meal is the best time to start drinking water again. So the body has had that hour to really break down the food. And consider having 2 solid meals and maybe 1 liquid meal. So that might be a soup in the evening, or it might be a smoothie in the morning. So that's something to consider. Eating only when hungry. We tend to fall into a cycle of just eating when we're not hungry, but maybe being more mindful of that. And if you're sitting at a desk all day and you're not getting to that exercise, that's where having 1 liquid meal really does help with just it helps with weight loss, obviously, but with actually speeding up the digestive process and then giving the body time to rest. And then you wake up most likely feeling really genuinely hungry. And then just food combining, making sure that you're having all the elements in the diet that we've talked about. So stress, I mentioned that's just a little story about the mice again. And I've also mentioned to you about the slow count of 5 through the nose and out again. And then when we exhale, we take the belly button back to the spine. So we really try and empty everything out. You can kind of challenge yourself to see how many you can count on the exhale, because you can probably inhale for 5 slowly, but exhale for like 8 or 10. And that's great because it gets rid of stale carbon dioxide and it gives more space for clean oxygen to come in. And just as I said, doing that 6 times should help move you out of fight and flight into your rest and digest. And meditation and yoga bring your focus away from stress and also from negative thoughts. So that's something that is also really important. And just these, as I said, these little practices of stress reduction can make a huge difference to the longevity and to your longevity and to the health and well-being in your body. So it's really something that, and it's easy to do. You don't have to commit to really anything apart from just a routine. And the one thing that also comes to mind about the 5 blue zones is that they really do have a routine. There's a lot of outdoor movement and walking and working on the land. That's what they were doing in most cases. And that routine, I mean, even in Loma Linda, there's a lot of activity going on there. These people, centenarians, are walking around, doing laps of the property and playing table tennis every day at 95 and things. So, but there's a routine, and I think the routine really helps people. So finding that time for yourself, just to, have a little bit of time to focus on what it is you need. It may be having a gratitude diary in the morning and writing 3 things you're grateful for when you wake up, and writing 3 at night when you go to bed. 3 great things that have happened today that you're grateful for. Things like that just help the body switch off as well. But the breathing will really make a difference to your stress. And this is the biggest killer for us now. A lot of my clients, I deal predominantly with cancer patients. As I said, they're really healthy, successful individuals who are not overweight and they've got cancer. But the one thing that I see that comes up time and time again is stress. And it's not coming down naturally of its own accord. We have to actively do that. So as spiritual and hippie as it might feel to go to yoga or do breath work or whatever, or meditation, it's actually incredibly powerful and can save your life. So it's something, if you don't do it, you may want to consider. But I'm sure you're all on this path already. And that is it for me. I'm sorry, I've raced through it really quickly because there was so much to cover and I didn't want to go over time. But I think that leaves us a little bit of time for questions if there are any. And I'll hand it back over to Andrea if she has anything to add.
Yes, wait a minute to start the video. Yes, thank you so much. It was so generous from your side, and we have some attendants. They ask about the video. Of course, we're gonna have the video published in about 2 weeks. And guys, you can reach to Bridget for Bridget. What do? You can do private session, or how it works. This if somebody wants to have a program, or how can you help us with your program?
Yeah. Absolutely. I tend to do a 21-day program. So I'll do a one-to-one consultation on Zoom I need usually about an hour and a half to 2 hours. We really go back to the very beginning and look at what's gone on and how we can navigate to get the right solution. And then I give you a protocol and we go through that. And then I'm literally available for the 21 days to really make sure that you're on board with it, and sort of someone's kind of keeping you accountable to make it happen so you can really make a change. Because I really want people to get well, and to make that change, you need someone to help you.
Yeah,
it's not about I've just literally vomited information at you all, but to remember all this and to know what to do, that's a whole different thing. So I'm there, and so I have clients, they'll WhatsApp me, oh, I'm just in the shop, should I buy this, or should I do this, or what should I eat, and I send recipes and all sorts of things, and then I'll do a follow-up at the end of the time, and just to make sure, and hopefully you've made a really transformational change so that it stays with you. And that's the idea, and I get good results that way. So that's mainly what I do.
Thank you so much. And I know that 21 days are the minimum time to change the patterns in our system. We have another question from Michael. What are your thoughts regarding CBD to relax and sleep aid?
Okay, see, this comes up a lot, and I am probably a little bit controversial about CBD, because I know everyone says, oh, it's wonderful, and I'm sure it is, and I know that they've had some great results with certain things. However, I don't use it, and I'll tell you why. Because it slows up the liver function. And so for me, I really think that we need our liver functioning well. So that's my concern. And I just, anything like that, where there's something that could be a problem, I steer away from. But that's not to say that it hasn't got good qualities. But that's the only thing to bear in mind. I would look into that.
And they said, should they be based with supplements, some supplements, or
in general, supplements in general? Yeah, definitely. So those things, the ones that I mentioned, supplements, yes, because unfortunately we're not getting enough of the goodness in the soil with a lot of the food nowadays. And we're playing catch up, because we've missed out, and we've mainly had this sort of what we call standard Western diet, which doesn't have enough nutritional value. We're also, as I said, depleting nutrients with things like coffee. Unfortunately, I mean, I love coffee as well, so I know that it's difficult, but so we're playing catch up a little bit, and supplements just help. We just kind of give a therapeutic dose just to get you up and running, and then sometimes you don't need to continue with them. But on the whole, I think if you're working and you're living in cities, you really do need supplementation, sadly. Yeah,
I take like 20 every day.
Yeah, I can imagine. And I just wanted to mention one thing on the supplements I hadn't mentioned is vitamin D. For those of you that don't know, vitamin D, we all have varying number of vitamin D receptors. So if you've grown up in a hot country, you'll have very few receptors, because there's so much sun, and you don't need to have a lot, because you're going to catch the sun. So what we find is, if those people then move to a cold country where there isn't a lot of sun, like good old England, we end up with vitamin D deficiency. And in fact, to the point that we have a Somalian population in the UK that have rickets. So that just shows you how deficient vitamin D they've become, just simply because there isn't enough sun. So if you've grown up in a hot country, you're living in a cold country or a colder area, or in the winter, you must definitely supplement with vitamin D.
I understand. And also about the sleep, do you have any suggestion about getting better sleep? Because I know most of the lawyers, they have this problem. They can't sleep because of the stress, of course. And
I can imagine, exactly. And I think, the lawyers I know here, they could probably have shares in the coffee industry. So for a start, I think that's something to really consider. We have to understand coffee is a drug, and we really have to respect it and keep it low. So definitely before midday, and maybe trying to only have one or two. I know it's difficult, but there are other options. I mean, even caffeine in green tea, it's a huge, huge antioxidant, so good for you. And actually it gets the caffeine working in the brain rather than whizzing around the whole body. So it's much more effective for your actual mental clarity. But sleep is, those of you that have a bathtub, you have Epsom salts in the bath at night, which is magnesium, will completely help relax the body. And lavender oil, obviously, keeping the air temperature in the room. I'm sorry, I don't know how it works in Fahrenheit, but it's 16 to 19 degrees Celsius, we say here in the room, in bedrooms at night. And a lot of people are sleeping in a room that was too hot, is too hot. And yes, I said screens off an hour before, and doing some breathing. Like if you do wake up, some people wake up automatically, of course, that cortisol's high. Just practicing those breathing in slowly for 5 and counting, the mind isn't working because it's starting to go into thinking about the breathing. And that's all we're trying to do, is get you to think about the breath, which stops that mind from starting to like wind up and worry you about the day ahead. So yeah, they're my main tips on sleep, I would say. And having that magnesium supplement will help. And there are other supplements as well. If sleep is really your issue, then there's a whole protocol for that.
Yeah, understand.
Yeah.
Another question here is, I understand that having multiple children shortens telomeres as well. Any suggestion to assist those with more than 2 children, especially as to supplementations?
Yeah, I mean, look, yes, absolutely. You know, women, we get a bit of a raw deal with the childbearing and the vitamins and minerals. There are, I would have to look into specifically what brands would be best, but just even focusing on what I've just said, those ones, vitamin C, D, the omegas, those minerals, that's kind of fairly standard for most people. And obviously, if you are particularly run down, you've had lots of children, then there are things that we can add as well on top of that. You know, stress, if you want to switch off, ashwagandha is something that we use. So that could be something that could be really nice on the weekends for people who have, you know, had a lot going on. The B complex, a good B complex, has everything that you need in it as a woman who's had babies. And yeah, there are a multitude of things that we could add on, but it's never specific like that. It's never, you know, this is the reason, how do I fix it? What we do is we go back to the beginning and we find out all the things. You know, did you grow up with having your tonsils out? Did you have a lot of antibiotics? Did you suffer from ear infections? Were you breastfed? Were you a cesarean baby? There are so many things that are layer, and then we find out, oh, now we know what's going on. Now we know where to target. You know, did you have catch a herpes virus? You know, that can be underlying for so many things. So we do a viral protocol. So, you know, it may not be just that you've had lots of kids and you're exhausted and you're working, which is incredible. And, you know, I know what that's like. But it's really looking underneath to find out what's going on.
Yeah, everybody is so complex and so different, and the environment is so important, and the patterns and everything. Yes, I think we are over now, and you have here your information. Thank you so much. It was so generous from your side, and such a beautiful webinar, and thank you. And I hope to see you soon in our webinars. And
thank you so much for inviting me. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you.